The next retreat is entitled The Tao of Love. In preparation for that retreat, the Sangha needs to understand very deeply both of those terms. The most important of them is love. What do we mean by love? It's not just a four-letter word. And it's not something that the ego is capable of. To reach the capacity to love requires the utmost growth and maturation. Because the ego always contains a narcissistic fragment that loves, but loves only its own interests. The word love, as it is used in ordinary discourse, refers to desire. It does not refer to love in its real sense. And it's only concerned with satisfying its own pleasures. There's nothing of interest in real love. In fact, the ego, we could say, is that force which is anti-love. When we talk about the death of the ego, we talk about the death of that which is in you that resists love, that hates love, that rejects love, and that cannot even understand love. And this is why the Christian tradition talks about sin. We are sinning against love. And if we sin against love, we sin against ourselves, let alone against God. We sin against our whole world. We sin against our community, because it is not a unity without love. There can be no community without love. But to be able to love means to be a true adult who has given up the childish narcissism that wants only to fulfill its own pleasure, get revenge for the ways it was hurt as a child, and project its hatred of itself onto others. If we do not stop doing that, we cannot create community. We certainly cannot create a new world, a new age. We cannot even live a decent life. And everything will collapse. Love is the key. And so we need to meditate very deeply on what we mean by love, what Ramana means by love, what God means by love. And so I looked up in Ramana's talks. There's only one reference to love in the whole index, but it's enough. For those of you wanting to have the number, it's talk 433, given on December 25th, 1937. That's appropriate. I'll begin it in the middle. It's a long talk. It's some professor who's very full of his own erudition comes to speak to him. And he's a professor of Sanskrit at Oxford. That explains it, doesn't it? Okay. And the professor was lecturing Ramana on the difference between mental perception and sense perception, trying to teach Ramana something. And Sri Ramana replies, "To infer one's existence, no other evidence is necessary." This is important. That cuts out the whole need to study philosophy. No matter what evidence you gain, no matter how many arguments you have, you don't need any of them. They're all useless. The indriyas, the senses, and the mind arising from the ego cannot serve as evidence relating to the self. The self is their basis. And the self is not something that ever appears empirically as an object. Therefore, it cannot be the subject or the object of science. They do not exist independently of the self. One's own existence is self-evident. Does anyone here worry about whether you exist or not? You might worry about the condition of your existence, the accuracy, the goodness, the worthiness, but you don't doubt your existence. Ramana says you can't. So therefore, why bother studying ontology? And he goes on to say, bliss is the self. all become dear only owing to the love of self. And so the love of anything else, including the love of money, which is the root of all evil, as Jesus correctly taught, it's all love. Everything in the world is love already. The problem is, once there is an illusion of an ego, that love becomes evil. Because it becomes love that separates, that creates exclusion, that creates prejudice, that creates me first. I want this, I love this money, I love this pie, I love whatever it is, and therefore I won't share it. And so the love is actually the cause of the hatred, because the love has been filtered through a false self that is separate from the universal, that includes all of us. And without including all of us, it is not love. Love cannot play favorites. Okay. The visitor says, love postulates duality. How can the self be the object of love? And Ramana corrects him and says, love is not different from the self. Love of an object is of an inferior order and cannot endure, whereas the self is love. In other words, Ramana says, God is love. Ramana and Christ are on the same wavelength here, aren't they? In fact, Ramana is on the same wavelength as Buddha and Lao Tzu and Krishna and all of the teachers of higher consciousness. The Tao is love. Brahman is love. You are love. And so whatever in you is not loving, whatever in you is demanding, whatever in you is anxious, fearful, sad, depressed, lonely, whatever is that which in you is false. Anything that is not love is not real. And so he asks Bhagavan which of the methods is the best to attain the goal. Is not Patanjali's the best? And they get lost in some of these things. And Ramana says, yes, it's fine. Yoga is to silence the mind. That's necessary because without silencing the ego mind of all of its chatter, which is about why I shouldn't love someone, or why I shouldn't be generous and do something loving for someone else because they didn't do this for me, or whatever is the narrative, all of that is always bullshit and is not real. And so yes, the first step is to silence the mind, because until you silence the mind, you will not realize that what you are is not the mind. And so the mind must be cleared out of the way. But because we love our mind, we love our own thoughts more than we love ourselves, we don't stop talking to ourselves, even in meditation, when we should be loving God. Does Sri Bhagavan advocate Advaita? He wants to get into another philosophical argument with him. And Ramana avoids it and says, Dvaita and Advaita are relative terms. They are based on the sense of duality. The self is as it is. There is neither Dvaita nor Advaita. You see, if there was Advaita, that would mean there was Dvaita. That means non-duality is already duality. And so therefore you cannot get into a philosophical argument about the nature of non-duality, because any argument has to occur within duality, because language is in duality. So Ramana says, I am that I am. Punto. Simple being is the self. The professor doesn't give up and says, this is not Mayavada, is it? Ramana says, the mind is Maya. Reality lies beyond the mind. So long as the mind functions, there is duality, Maya, etc. Once it is transcended, the reality shines forth. Although it is said to shine forth, self-effulgence is the self. The shining forth is not a shining forth from the self, it is the self. Because there is nothing but the self. And the entire universe is nothing but that shining forth. The visitor says it is Satchidananda. Ramana says, Satchidananda itself is said only to indicate that the Supreme is not asat, is not non-truth, it's not achit, meaning it's not insentient, It's not an-ananda, different from bliss. Because we are in the phenomenal world, we speak of the self as Satchidananda, but even that is not true. Aham, I, the professor says, applies to the individual and also to Brahman. It is rather unfortunate. Ramana says, no, it is an upadhi. Owing to different limiting adjuncts, it is necessary to speak in these ways. In order to be able to reach non-duality, we have to speak to an ego that's embedded in duality to get you beyond it. The bodily limitations pertain to the aham of the jiva, whereas the universal limitations pertain to the aham of Brahman. Take off the upadhi, the limiting adjunct, and the I, aham, is pure and single. So the goal of yoga is not to eliminate the I, it's to realize the I. But it is God's I, not the body's I, not an ego's I, not a soul's I. No I except the one which cannot be spoken and which has no limitation. And that is what you are. Does Bhagavan give Diksha, which is initiation? He wants to jump into that already. I guess he's been convinced. And Bhagavan says no. Mona is the best and the most potent Diksha. Mona means silence. There's no teaching involved. It's just stop the illusion that you're teaching yourself anyone or teaching anyone else anything. That is the only initiation. And Ramana says that was practiced by Dakshinamurti. Touch, look, etc., all of a lower order. Silence changes the heart. There is no guru and no disciple. If you believe that I'm other than you, you're already lost in duality. Ramana is saying, don't identify who I am with the body that you're looking at, and don't identify yourself as the body that seems to be seeing. The Ajnani, Ramana says, confounds his body with the self, so he takes the other's body for the guru. But does the guru think his body to be the self? He has transcended the body. There are no differences for him. So the Ajnani cannot appreciate the standpoint of guru and sishya. This is the most important point. Until you have realized you are not a body and you stop living for the comfort of the body, you will not even be able to begin to understand your real self, nor understand or feel love. Is there then no difference between the one and the other? The professor asks. And Ramana says, yes, there are differences from the standpoint of the phenomenal world, but not from that of reality. They go on a little longer, and the professor throws up some other religious paths, like Shaiva Siddhanta, which is a dualistic path of Shiva worship. And he says they postulate three fundamentals as being eternal. Is it opposed to Vedanta? Ramana says the three entities are Jiva, God, and bondage. Such trinities are common in all religions. They are true so long as the mind is operative. They are mere creations of the mind. One can postulate God only after the mind arises. God is not different from the self. But when the mind arises, the self is objectified as God. So also with the Guru. You can't stop your mind from arising. It's already arisen. But you can transcend it. And you can recognize that everything your mind says is a resistance to love. Nothing more than that. And the only way to reach love is to transcend the mind and reach the real self. And since you already are the self, it doesn't take any effort at all. But what it does require is the willingness to let go of the narcissism and the sense of lack and the sense of deserving that is based on some illusion of competitiveness that the ego is always involved in. I deserve more than the other. I am more worthy, less worthy, whatever. It's always comparing itself. And it's always therefore creating a conflict with the other. And so rather than love, there is always a sense of envy, hatred, or repulsion, or desire. But desire objectifies the other. It defiles the other because it does not recognize the other as the bodiless self. We are not bodies. So any concern with how your body looks or feels, or even its state of health, is already destroying your health because you are putting negative energy in rather than filling the body with Shakti. The only way to be healed is to be whole. And to be whole means to be one with Brahman. There is no other wholeness. And that is only achieved through the elimination of the mind that separates and that calculates and that only wants its own individual petty good, which always brings it to a backlash of karmic suffering and evil that falls upon oneself as a result of one's own projections of that lack of goodness onto the other. Whatever you see in the other will return to you 1,000-fold. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. So let us sow blessings of love in the world and see only the God Self in each one, and then that God Self will arise as the community itself. And there will be blessings enough to save the entire planet. So let's meditate on true love and bring love into you if you don't already feel it. Invoke it from the God that you have objectified as other than yourself, and then realize it as yourself and bathe in the love, because love is the only energy that will heal you and save you from the sin, the ignorance, the lack, the suffering that the ego is stuck in. And this redemption is available immediately. Just get real.